It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. All right, guys, so we're back with another episode of Table Talk. Today, my guests are John and Renee Jewett. Tom is assisting as a co-host again. John is the founder and educator of J3 University, IFBB Pro. We got a powerlifting background we're going to talk about a little bit. Masters of Science. The RD is that registered dietitian?
It is, yeah.
And then a CSCS. Renee's also an IFBB Pro. Won the Tampa Pro last year?
2021.
Yeah.
2021. And we got all kinds of topics to talk about because as I was vetting through your stuff, there's a lot, so that's like, hey, Tom, there's a lot of things here to kind of go through and delve in. So we're just going to have a conversation and just kind of blast through these kind of one by one. So if you've been following the Table Talk podcast, you know that element is a staple in most strength athlete and coaches' repertoire when working with the athletes or as they're preparing for whatever endeavor they're preparing for. I personally use it every day. My favorite flavor is the grapefruit, which I'll mix in water during my training, post-training, or basically throughout the whole day. I'll also use half a pack on my oatmeal in the morning. And if I don't put it in my oatmeal, then I'll put half a pack in my coffee. There's a variety of different chocolate flavors that come into the chocolate pack. I use it. I'm using it throughout the entire day. I'm not front loading it before my training. And I find that it completely eliminates the brain fog, which I just had, so maybe I should have had my element. Table Talk listeners can receive a free sample pack with any order. To go to www.drinkelement.com/tabletalk. That again is www.drinkelement.com/tabletalk. Element also offers a no questions asked refund policy. So if you don't like it for any reason, give it to a salty friend and they'll give you a complete 100% money back. All right, guys, if you're anything like me, there's going to be certain times of the year where you're going to suffer from brain fog because either you're working too much or not working enough, or your training just sucks and it's not going the way that you want it to go. Merrick Health can help with this. Merrick Health is a premium telehealth platform that focuses on hormone optimization and preventative medicine. AmerickHealth.com/Table Talk. You look for the guided optimization. You set that up. You'll get 10% off your first order, even if it is just the labs or the guided optimization, by using the code TABLETALK. Today's episode is brought to you by First Detachment, founded by world-renowned coach Justin Harris, also a friend of mine that I've known for 20 years. So when it comes to integrity, brand, and product ingredients, there's nobody that I trust more. I don't have to worry about the supplements that you guys use, if it's a pre-workout, intra-workout, not being as labeled and what they're supposed to be. Check out their website today at firstdetachment.com. Use the code TABLETALK to save 10% off your first order. The website again is firstdetachment.com. Discount code TABLETALK, 10% off your first order. To start with, because I look at your notes last, right? So I'm listening to the podcast and all this other stuff, then I looked at the notes. And the powerlifting thing I didn't know until I looked at the notes, right? So it was 8 years. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, thanks for having us on.
Yeah.
And this is super nostalgic for me because I did start in powerlifting and trying to find information. This is 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Like, where do you learn about powerlifting? And it's just like when you go to the powerlifting meet, you swap talk. You're like, oh, this is what whoever's doing. And then started coming across elitefts articles. Mm-hmm. And that's where I started diving in. And before we even jumped on, I was telling Renee, like, one of the guys I trained with faxed me. So this is when you have fax. He faxed me like a West Side conjugated method. You know, it was like a 10-page thing. A guy, we're like, oh, this is our new training Bible we're gonna go by. So so I've been following like the Elite FTS articles for a long time, and that eventually translated into seeing like Justin Harris and Shelby Starnes and these guys educating through here. So that was my first introduction into bodybuilding. So cool to be here.
No, that's great. That's great. The fax thing cracks me up because I kind of forgot about that.
Yeah.
I used to have to say, when some of the vendors I had that were drop shippers, I'd have to like fax, you know, and I'd get orders that way. So when I'd hear that noise, even now, if I hear that noise, I'm like, yeah, because that always meant one thing. It was an order. It was an order coming through. Yeah, that's that loud, screechy type of thing. And then
right, there's some money.
Yeah. So how'd you get into the powerlifting?
Like probably most kids, different sports I played, and got into weight training in middle school, and then like early in football, everyone's like testing their bench, right? Different positions. I was a safety, and I always had the second highest bench in our football team. I'm like 135 pounds. I'm like, I'm really good at this lifting thing, and I like that more than getting on the field.
When did that happen? Like what, the junior year? Like
that was my freshman year in high school.
Freshman year, yeah.
I started lifting in 6th grade. Bodybuilder neighbor gave me his weight set, and I loved it. Loved lifting.
Are you old enough that was the plastic set?
No, but it was like the standard barbell with the screw on.
Oh, okay, yeah.
They're like gold plates. So your hands were like filthy by the end of using them. But I got trapped on the bar a few times in my dad's like upstairs work shed just because it was the rack that wasn't too narrow. So if you put too much weight, it's just going to flip over. But I'm gonna have to roll it down off me. So I basically did bench press and bicep curls for a few years before I had any sense.
The one and only foundational program.
Right.
Yeah.
But it was early on that the training was more of a passion for you than football and sports. And
yeah. I just, when you start off, it's all about vanity. You just want to get big and jacked and look, look the part. So, but the strength piece was like the natural one that stood out for me. And once I started realizing that more in high school, seeing that differentiation, and in Texas, we're from, like, I went to my buddy's school in East Texas, and they actually had a powerlifting team. Yeah. I'm like, this is a thing? Like, oh man, okay. It's all about this is football. A sport.
Yeah, I get it.
So you maybe had wrestling on the East Coast North, and we had some wrestling mats. The football coaches pulled those out. But in South Texas, they do have powerlifting in high school. So I found some guys locally that were doing it. They're like in their 40s. And my old bodybuilding neighbor took me down to Joe's gym, and we met these powerlifters. I'm like, these guys are monstrous. Like, it was a whole nother world, because you're kind of like the bigger dog in high school, right? Like, got the big bench press. Like, all right. Oh, yeah. Then it's a whole nother world. Like, and so these guys had some world records in powerlifting already. They're benching like in the 600s. I'm like, what is going on? So that's when I started bridging into it. Just by my sophomore year, I was trekking down 30 minutes just to train with these guys, and they were doing a lot of bench only meets. So they weren't, I guess we're not true powerlifters. We're just bench.
Yeah, that's a debate that's been going on for decades.
So yeah, that was my first like kind of introduction, starting to get into powerlifting when I was 16.
Did you do the high school meets, or did you start straight in the USAPL?
No, so we were doing different ones: APF, WABDL, USAPL.
But it wasn't the high school meet.
No, we only football. It was like a big 5A Texas high school, so we didn't have anything like that.
Okay. So how long was it until you did your first meet then?
Oh gosh, just I trained for a few months and then hit the first one, and that was a APF meet in Austin, where Jill Mills lifted that meet, and she benched more than me, and I was like, well, that's discouraging.
Yeah, how was that experience?
Wild. Oh, it was wicked. We took my parents, right? So they're like, whole nother exposure to this. I keep shocking my parents with bodybuilding and powerlifting, but anyway, that was great.
Total you?
Yeah. I benched only though, so I did I think it was 275 my first powerlifting meet for bench press.
I had the same experience for one of my first, it was one of my first meets. It was before the rounds formula. Right. So it just started with the weight, kind of like what weightlifting does. It just goes up. Right. So it was like me, and then me, and then me, and then it was like Laura Dodd, right? And I'm like 350, 400, 450, she's like 500, right? The bench, I had her on the bench, right? But then the deadlift, the same type of thing. And then afterwards, I thought it was the greatest thing in the world. Like I just got waxed by Lord God, right? So I can be so much stronger. I just suck and need to figure it out.
Yeah, I figured if it was at least the world's strongest woman beating me, and I was in high school, I'm like, well, I accept this for now.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
When you did that, were you sold? Like this is what you want to continue to keep doing?
Oh man, I was sold before I even did the first meet.
Yeah.
I was already so bought in to lifting and strength and just the community that we had, training with these guys that were older and kind of mentoring me. I loved it. So even before I did the first meet, I already knew I was bought in, but I am like an all in type of person, obsessive, probably like why we all cater into these kind of sports, but whatever it was, I was all into I did, paintball competitive competitions, and I've done, the track, I've done gymnastics, I've done martial arts, but nothing really stuck like weightlifting. I was hooked. So,
how long did you stay in powerlifting for? It was 8 years, right? Then
it was about 8 years. So roughly like 25, 26 is when I got out of it. So I did it through college.
Okay. What were your best lifts?
Best in a full meet, it was an 1820 total.
Yeah.
And that was, I can't remember exactly what my number was. I think it was 617 squat, a 634 bench, and a 606 deadlift. Yes, I benched more than I squat.
Yeah, yeah. And deadlifted. Yeah.
Deadlifted.
So I did bench only for a long time.
Yeah.
So my best bench only meet in WABDL was a 706, and that was at 198 pounds.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, 220 pounds. I did was a 673 at 198. So that was single ply back then. Back when I was doing it, it was, you're still equipped. Now Raw is the thing now. So I guess, whatever that means.
Yeah.
In powerlifting, you have a world record, but then 10 other guys have world records in the same weight class in different federations. So it kind of loses a little bit of the allure. But
when you say you said you did like competitive paintball and all those other things, but they didn't stick, do you think the community that you found with the lifting, like you said, you kind of got integrated into that group that educated you and gave you something to aim for upwards? Do you think that had an integral part in powerlifting sticking with you compared to all the other sports? Or do you just think it was something that was just always going to click with you anyway?
I think it was something just within me. Because even like when in power, like say paintball, for instance, like I was still like the one that was all in more than my other friends that were doing it. So I was kind of the one pulling them that way. Even in like high school lifting, like I'm the one everyone's kind of coming to see like these opinions from, like, John, what do you do? You're the strong guy. So I think I pulled a lot of the people in. Having the community was a great aspect to it. But it still wasn't something just more innate that I wanted out of it. Even bodybuilding now, it's still kind of individual.
Yeah, and it just feels like it resonates with you on a basal level almost. Yeah.
Did you connect with that more than, say, football team?
Oh, no, I was terrible at team sports.
Yeah, he's not a team player.
Yeah. Well, so that was what my experience was, and I played football and I was a captain of the team and all the other stuff, but I would get so pissed off, right? Because I'd bust my ass and then we'd lose, but I knew I did my part, but the other people were doing their part. Right. And that always drove me absolutely nuts, which kind of pushed me more into the powerlifting side of the whole thing. But I don't regret playing because I don't know how I would have learned teamwork outside of that, so it had some value with that. But was that kind of the same thing for yourself?
Yeah, I'm just kind of a control freak in aspects. So there's like a lack of control too. And it's harder to progress in it because it is based on all these other players, like you're saying, but I just wasn't as good at it. Like whatever that was, like say football, like I wasn't the fastest. I didn't have this long track of athletic background. Like some of these friends played peewee football. I didn't do that. So things that just naturally weren't that great at, I just didn't want to do. I want to do stuff I'm like excellent at. That I could see out the potential there. So if I was like mediocre at it, it just wouldn't stick.
Renee, how did you get into training?
My story is not as exciting as his. I dabbled a little bit in high school with like my sister powerlifted and she had like a bunch of like state records and everything. So I was like, okay, maybe this is something that I can do. Anyway, she went off to college and I started dabbling a little bit. And my mom grew up in like the Jane Fonda era. And she was always like, no, you're just going to get like too bulky if you do that, you know? So I was like, okay, maybe I shouldn't do this. So like I kind of dabbled in like soccer and like golf and like all these other sports, and it didn't stick, you know? So I didn't do anything for a really long time. Like, gosh, I didn't start till my early 20s. And initially, I kind of got interested in like bodybuilding. I went to the LA Fit Expo and was kind of introduced to that world. And there was a couple of athletes that I kind of followed a little bit at the time, and I saw them there, like Jamie Eason around that time, and really looked up to her. And I was like, I want to do something like this. So I eventually like kind of got into the gym, started lifting a little bit, saw that there was a division called figure, and I was like, okay, I want to do that. So I trained for like about a year and did a figure competition, did terrible. And I was like, okay, maybe I'm not cut out for this, you know. Took like a 10-year break. I was still going to the gym, like still really like loved that bodybuilding lifestyle. But kind of wrote off like competing, you know, until I met him. And, you know, he was all in it at the time, still is. But the wellness division came out and he was like, hey, you know, maybe you should try this out. And I was like, I don't know, I really sucked when I did figure. So he convinced me to give wellness a try. And he has been coaching me since pretty much since we met. 2017.
Signed up for a lot.
Yeah, I signed up for a lot.
Yeah, you want a boyfriend and a coach? Like what else?
What's that, like the deluxe platinum package on your website?
Yeah, for those that don't know, what's the difference between wellness and figure, and also bodybuilding as well, because there's a transition there as well.
Well, wellness is the newer division that came out. Well, they started in 2019. It was already in like South America, Brazil, but they brought it to the IFBB. And it's basically a more developed lower body, smaller, less developed upper body.
So what are they judging on? I get it, it's a subjective sport, right? But compared to like figure, what are they judging compared to that?
Figure has more of that kind of like X-frame, right? So like wider back, like wider clavicles, more developed upper body, probably more narrow hips, less developed in the glutes, legs. Whereas wellness, you want more development. Size is, you know, a lot more than figure would be, but the upper body is smaller.
What about
that makes sense?
Leanness?
Leanness for wellness, it's supposed to be just about like the bikini.
Wasn't that how figure started too?
Yeah, it's kind
so
of,
it's kind of going that way where it's getting leaner and leaner with wellness.
It has shifted. It shifted that way. Like we prepped her for like her first shows where we were doing it. Like she had glute striations, like it was lean, and that was rewarded. Then they started pulling, like her lash, they did like, you're a little too hard now, like, of course. So it's trying to have the balance still of like not too conditioned, but still have the separation of like a glute and hamstring.
It's always good when they let you know what they're looking for afterwards, right?
Right.
But
with wellness course, it's like a huge emphasis on just have gigantic glutes.
So what has it been like with him being your coach and you coaching her? Because that's a different dynamic. Like, does she send you photos? I mean, how do you do the checks and stuff like that?
I'm like a regular old client. Like I take pictures, I send them a check-in, and we keep the coach-client relationship, you know, very separate from the husband-wife.
Now, did it start that way, or did it start with you just looking at her?
No, it started that way too. And I'm also very like tracking and comparing back things. So it's like, well, I need this just for the tracking purposes that I'd want to do, compare back things over time. So I wanted those things in place anyway, but that's how it started. And I figure it would be, because in my last relationship, my last marriage, I tried to do this as well, and it was a disaster, right? So, but different dynamic, right? I brought bodybuilding in at that time, so I wasn't seen in that role. Well, when we got together, I was already John the bodybuilder and the coach. So different view a little bit, but at the same time, like Renee, it works well because Renee's one that I would have to pull her back and save herself versus have to police and push her more. And I think when you have the spouse that you're having to do that with, that's where you can run into probably problems. So I don't have to ever worry about Renee is going to cheat on her diet. I need to be like eyeing her food or, so she'll execute. So it makes it a little easier in that sense.
I'd say the same. I coach my wife, Naomi, and have done for pretty much the whole time we've been together. And yeah, life's way easier when people are like, oh, how do you do that? How do you wear two hats? It's like, well, she's an easy client.
How's that work if you're in a fight, right? So she's pissed at you for whatever reason, or you're pissed at her for whatever reason, but that checkup still has to happen. Does that still happen?
Yeah, just sorry, babe, I'm doubling your cardio this week.
Yeah.
Sitting there.
You get what I'm saying, though, because life is life, right? There's ups and downs, is all that too.
The check-ins will still happen. We're pretty easygoing. So we never had some big blowout ever to where you're like, done, I'm not sending you check-ins. Like check-ins will still happen. So that communication happens on the coaching front. But we're more, if we do have an argument, it's usually more we're kind of stonewallers and we'll like check out. Yeah. We just won't talk.
Check out for a minute, then come back together.
So yeah, I guess that works for us personality wise too.
Yeah.
But it also has been great because we'll compete at the same time and prep at the same time. So mentally we're staying focused. Like we're both hungry together.
I was about to say, what's that like when you're both getting real close then?
Gosh, people like, we know some couples that, compete together and they tell us like how hard it is and how do you guys do it? And for us, it just works.
Is it a case of just mutual suffering?
Exactly.
Yeah, you understand how the other person feels, but you forget how bad it sucks, right? When you're in the off season with food, you're like, oh yeah, I'll do that prep again. Like that wasn't too bad. Then you get back and you're like, why am I doing this? This is ridiculous. So yeah, you understand the other person's feelings, but we've done some things where I was in the off season or she was in prep. I'm like, dang, Renee's like, she's kind of fiery today. But in prep, I probably wouldn't even realize it because I'm just trying to bear my own misery.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, you're preoccupied with your own suffering at that point.
Yeah.
What was it like with you both doing the Olympia at the same time?
I think you hit a nerve.
It was.
Well,
I'm high anxiety when I compete.
Yeah, I mean that's a big stage. It's the biggest stage, right? But it's also awesome that you're both doing it at the same time. As an outsider looking in, I'm like, this is freaking awesome. But gotta ask.
No, what an opportunity. It was it was a rough year in prep. Because that was like the COVID years as well. Yeah. So like,
was that being moved around that year? Was it 2021 that you did it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, so it got bumped, right? Or was that the 2020 shows that they were moving around?
It was the 2020 shows that they were moving around.
Yeah.
And so, when she won Tampa, we ended up both getting like COVID around that time too.
Yeah.
But you're qualified for the Olympia. And she was like,
I was
near bedbound for like 2 weeks.
Bad.
But how do you not do the Olympia?
Yeah.
Like this might be your only one and the first time they're doing wellness at it.
Well, and I think there was like an 8-week span between Tampa and the Olympia. So when I got sick, it like took me out for like 2 solid weeks. And it's like, okay, now you have this short period that you need to jump back into prep and get ready for the Olympia. And it's like, okay, you're stepping onto the biggest stage in the world and you're just coming off of being really sick. And now you have to go back into prep. It was a lot.
Yeah.
So
mentally it was a tough spot for her because she wasn't bringing her best look that she knew she could. Amazing experience to share.
Yeah.
It's just the actual being able to sit in the moment and just cherish that for what it was harder because the performance side, you worried about how you're going to look at that day. So it did kind of pull back a little bit of what the moment could have been. But reflecting on it, it was still phenomenal.
Yeah. Well, being further away, you can reflect on it differently.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, being competitors, you're always going to be upset that you couldn't bring your best.
Sure.
But looking back now, how was like you said, how was the experience with some room between that? For sure, I was always thankful we did it without a question.
For sure.
Yeah.
And there's just such a cool picture we have of us walking together with our Jewetts on the back, right? And we're like going to Olympia, the Olympia's in the background. And it's like such a rarity that you're going to have two people married that are
I never thought
together.
that I would turn pro, let alone like step on the Olympia stage. So to do it together, it was just, it's amazing,
Yeah.
If I may, I just want to go back to the point you made about being very anxious, because this is actually a question I had written down for you anyway. When you get competitors who are naturally very nervous and very anxious, right? I mean, I think it's quite, would you agree that it's quite common that sometimes the reason competitors will miss their peak is because they're so worried about missing their peak? The stress and the anxiety and the cortisol and the adrenaline just causes all the water. You know this stuff better than I do. So when you've got someone now who was also your wife in that scenario, what do you have any tactics to help deal with competitors who are naturally anxious so that they don't miss their peak because they're worrying about missing their peak?
Well, I think a lot of it's in just the preparation, at least if you're not in person, like I'm of course in person with Renee, but if you're online coaching and coach sends you the plan, a lot of people are just out there. Like I've been in that position. There's a lot of things that are left for you to figure out. Right. And especially when you change the environment, you're now at the show and you're not in your monotonous routine every day. Like you've been in prep. You're like, well, when should I go to Tate? Do I take my food with me? Like, how do I get my information to my coach? There's a lot of questions around that can build a lot of anxiety. So at least for like coaching athletes, a lot of things is I try to like lay out the planning as far as travel goes. Hey, don't fly in at some crazy ass time in the morning. You have to get up way earlier or fly in really late, and make sure you have enough time in advance. And then planning out the day too. So I like give times with even meals. Yeah. Some people don't do that. They're just like, yeah, just eat, every so often with fluids, everything. So it's like configured to where there's not as much stress to build up. So I think the planning piece is huge for one. But again, you can't remove too much without just going through it.
Yeah, for sure.
Like you have to go through it. Then also I think having some guidance around the psychological side of planning out the vision of like you going on stage. So a lot of times doing my cardio was like me thinking about being in line and what that would feel like and what I want to feel like in line. Then before walking on stage, what do I want to feel like? What's it feel like John Jewett in first place? Like letting that just filter in my mind. So when I do get back there, I can kind of call to that. Yeah. So I think the psychological training is a big piece, especially to foster that in the people that you are coaching. But again, like I said, it comes down to experience. Like you just have to go through it.
I do like what you said there about like, if you've got someone who's naturally anxious, they're an overthinker. So the more structure you give them, the less they have to think. And I've seen plans where it's like, just eat carbs mainly on the day. And it's like, well, you couldn't give them any less information. Whereas if it's eat this at 7, eat this at 10, okay, it's effort to do exactly that. But at least now I have infinitely less questions and things to think about.
And I don't know how far we want to go here, but if, in a hypothetical, you could even use something that like even musicians and things have used for like performance anxiety and keep things steady. Like some people have used different beta blockers on show day to relieve some of that. So like, hey, you don't at least have the symptoms of anxiety, about to go on, your heart rate's jumping and you realize that, and now it jumps even more. And then you feel like the shakes. It's like you had some that calmed that a little bit. Yeah. That may keep you a little bit more steady on stage. So some people have used things like that. I wouldn't bank on those. Try to do all the other things first before going some route like that. But it could be things that could be utilized. Yeah.
But it's just, I think that's a variable that doesn't get spoken about.
Yeah.
No, that much,
And you're right. You do everything before, like, what are you going to do on the actual stage? It's like people suck at posing. No one practices their posing. It's like, we're going to go play this basketball game. So have you dribbled the ball? No. Yeah. That's literally what you're going to do.
Figure it out.
Out there. It's like, I don't practice my posing. Like, well, you'd be probably less nervous. You knew you could walk up there and nail your routine, know exactly what you're going to do. And that's another piece of it too, is like we lack a lot of the coaching around everything outside of just when someone's calling you up for poses. And what I mean by that is like, what do you do when you're standing on the sidelines before they call you to the middle or your transitions? Or what do you do before they're like, all right, guys, we're about to call the pose. And you're like, should I hold my pose tight or relax, or how do I save my breath? Like all that should be trained, so you're less nervous.
Actually,
out there.
Training the art and the skill of the competing rather than just getting them in the shape to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Kind of like you do for every sport.
Yeah, funny that, right?
It's a fundamental.
Exactly. Yeah. When did the pivot and why the pivot into bodybuilding?
My initial, I guess, going back, I was a kid of the late 80s, early 90s. So it was all about muscle, right? Arnold and Stallone and Van Damme. So I always wanted that look. I just happened to be strong. And so that led to powerlifting. I was hoping by the time I was benching over 500 pounds that I had like this big chest and triceps. And that wasn't the case. So I remember one meet, I was in the bathroom and, I was washing my hands. Some guy came out washing. He's like, "Oh, cool. What are you doing? Are you doing the 165? I was 181 at the time. Like, God, that was demoralizing. Thanks. Let me go lift some heavy ass weight now. It's like someday I want to actually look bigger than, I actually weigh. So I always had that in the back of my mind, but eventually in powerlifting, I was starting to kind of beat my own records. And I was starting to like reach a peak where things weren't progressing as much either. And it just started losing interest. And I always had bodybuilding in the back of my mind. And so that's when I made the transition, and I was always the meticulous powerlifter by that point. So I had my like Excel sheet, my diet all mapped out. Like, what powerlifter does that? Like, you don't need your chicken and rice as your powerlifter, you weirdo.
Well, it's more common today, but back then, no.
Back then, no.
Just you? I'm going to guess and say it was just you. That was it.
Yeah. Like, I want to mass on this, rice and chicken that's dry as fuck. So, but yeah, anyway, that was around that time. Started transitioning, be like, all right, I'm gonna give this bodybuilding thing a go, and just had a show in mind, the Lackland, because that was our San Antonio show, and planned out for a year, and that's when I jumped in.
So, how'd you change your training?
Well, we're talking about elite FTS and all the articles and things come about. So my introduction was through DC training, because Justin Harris was writing articles for elite FTS. I'm like, this guy has like some thought out approach in bodybuilding when you didn't find other people that were really leaving out like a thoughtful bodybuilding approach. It's more like magazine articles and stuff, right, that you couldn't make sense of. So dug into DC training, read everything I could on the forums around it. And that was my first introduction. It connected well because it was still performance based. So
it's hard.
Yeah. And I love grinding weights. That's what, if anything I learned from powerlifting, like that's it. You know how to grind out weights, and that's what I could take into like doing DC training. So that was the initial. I was doing like 4 days a week. It was that rotation of like a kind of a push pull legs back then. And jumped to a few different programs, but always had switched a little bit back to doing some form of like DC training. My mistake was that I still had the powerlifting mentality of point A to point B. There was no like thought of like what comes between. And so that led to just some unproductive years. I have some injuries and things, nothing major, but still I could have been more precise, probably use less load, and probably a little more accurate development. Things that were lacking from powerlifting, like it didn't have delts, right? Didn't do a lateral raise, didn't do enough rowing work. So there's things that I could have done better thinking back.
How'd the first show go?
Decent. I won the overall in the novice. I won my I was a middleweight. I won that and almost won the overall in the open, but the heavyweight won. So it was a good first outing. I coached myself to it. Was pretty conditioned. Could have been better, but again, I was coaching myself. It's when you're broke bodybuilding and you do what you can. So, but I was again like powerlifting hooked.
So then, what was the road to getting your pro card?
Yeah, so that was took another off season. Went to the show that I was told to go to was the Texas State, and that's when I realized it was a bit more demoralizing. I got 8th or 9th at that show, and that was when the Texas State was still like, it was really hard to get to nationals. So your guys that would actually qualify were now circling back through, and there were some guys that all of them had like eventually turned pro, and I like didn't have enough tan on. I wasn't lean enough. I wasn't big enough. So I'm like, damn, okay, this is what it takes. Another year went by, did the Branch One Classic, got in better shape. I won. And that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to take another year, and then I'm going to do my first national show. And that's when I also decided I should probably hire a coach. Stop trying to reinvent the wheel over here. But that I did one nationals once. I sucked all the way down to be a middleweight again, and then came back the next year as a heavyweight and won at the USA's, which was a pretty big transformation. So I went weighed in at 176. I was about 184 ready. The next year I came back and was 209 when I actually competed, but was like 214, 215 the day before. So had a good, decent, like 30 pounds of stage weight that I added throughout that year.
Wow.
That led to that USA's win.
So I think a big part of what, crucial detail there that was kind of glossed over was competition, your break, competition, your break. How many people are going into their first show and being patient enough to go 1 year? Then, do you know what I mean? Like, as opposed to, maybe even more on the female side, better than I do, where they want to compete every 6 or 9 months, and then they wonder why they're stepping on stage 2 pounds better off or whatever it might be. But even there, right from the start, you're taking a whole year to actually get better before you go back in and assess.
Yeah, it's so rushed nowadays. People come to me like, hey, I want the pro card this year and I want to hit this show. And like when I was first doing it, there was only really bodybuilding around. And so you realize, okay, this is like a 5 to 10 year endeavor to maybe get a pro card. So the time commitment was there. I could see out the long term, but I just knew I needed time to grow. So what do you do at this show? Evaluate. What do you need? More size. Okay, let me do that. How long that's going to take? I think a good year is a good starting point. Reevaluate the next show and just keep moving up from there.
When you came in, where was the pro card status? Because it's increased, right? Was it still like overall only for the USA, or was it overall and each division?
You had to first in your division.
First in your division, okay. Because going back further, I think it was only overall for the USA, right?
It was the only overall. Not sure when they actually started that.
Yeah.
Close in the overall. Rashid Oldacre, he was the super heavy. He won. Now I won the heavies. But now it seems like it's quite, I want to say it's easier to get a pro card, but it's diluted down.
There's just more of them.
There's more nationals. There's more competitors too, but shifting in different different divisions, right? Classic is challenging now. It's so deep. Bodybuilding, it's kind of diminished a little bit. So.
Well, I think as it grows, they'll probably pull them back a little bit because a lot of these new divisions, you have to have people in them.
You do,
right? Yeah. So it makes. I see the reason why people complain. But that there's too many, but I think they forget the fact that you still have to have people in the shows.
Right.
And if there's more pro shows, which everybody wants, right? Right. Then you got to have people in them.
Yeah.
Now it's, as these divisions have all grown, at some point, I don't know. I would think now you start trimming it back.
And they have.
Yeah.
They have. And so like this year, it's extremely competitive and deep lineups in these pro shows. So either way, like your top pro guys are going to rise to the top.
Yeah.
So at the highest level, you're still going to see the best of the best. So what does it mean for a pro card? Like back in the early 2000s, it's like if you were a pro, there's only a few of them. You could tell when you saw a pro. Now it's like, oh yeah, we're pros. We're all pros. Okay, but still, like, what's the point? You want to look like you're a pro.
Yeah. Renee, what was your path to the pro card?
Oh gosh, mine was quick. It really was. So wellness division started in 2019, and I did my first regional show in 2020, and that was in Tampa. I won my class there, and was it 4 weeks later?
Yeah.
4 weeks later, I did my first national show at Junior USA's. I got third there, and he convinced me to do.
Yeah, six cookies deep.
Yeah, I was like
hey, let's come on.
six sushi rolls and 6 cookies deep, like 12 pounds up. He was like, hey, let's do this next show like 6 days later. I was like, oh no.
Yeah, we booked a flight in Charlotte to go to Pittsburgh. To jump over right over there.
Yeah. So I competed in Pittsburgh, and I won my class, and that's where I turned pro.
Okay. Well, at that point, I mean, it's just putting glycogen back in, right?
Yeah,
and
basically.
It was fine.
Yeah, just drop some water.
Yeah.
It was okay.
Yeah.
That was COVID, right? So that show was in a tent with only the judges and the competitors. So.
Yeah, so there wasn't an audience. He was back in the hotel
That's the show that you won your pro show on? That was the one.
And,
God.
Thinking about winning my pro card, I imagined it so big in my head. So to have them call my name like Renee Jewett, IFBB Pro, like you walk out there and it's just silence. No clapping, nobody yelling for you, just silence. So it was kind of like a bummer, but I saw him like when we were all done, and like he just had like the tears in his eyes, and it was a great experience at that show.
I ran down to outside the tent.
Yeah. I mean, overall, it was good for what it was. And then I took about a year off season from there. About a year off season. Did my first pro show in Chicago and got third there, and then couple weeks later.
Yeah, it was like 4 weeks.
About 4 weeks later, did Tampa and won my first pro show. So it escalated very quickly from turning pro to winning my first pro show to stumping on the Olympia stage.
That's great.
After like not competing for 10 years and being very new to it. So
no, it's great. It's also great because there's a lot of people that are going to be so pissed off because of that. But
yeah, she's the one. Great. Hey, I want to turn pro this year. Like, well, shit. Okay, I guess you can do it.
Yeah. And when did your training change? Because you had the DC training, the powerlifter mentality, and all that. When did it change to have bodybuilding intent and more focus to actually build muscle and maintain muscle through contest prep?
It was just a development along the way. So there wasn't some big transition point. You know, you're kind of picking up things from guys that you're just interacting with and seeing. So,
well, to a point, but you've taken the education to a whole different level, right? So you've gone deep in all this stuff. So was it because of lack of progress or because you just infatuated with it?
Absolutely obsessed on every level. So anything that I could find to get better, that's what I do. Like, why did I go to school? Well, as a means to just provide for myself in bodybuilding or find things that I can study to be a better bodybuilder. And so resulted in a career, but the main thing was just how can I just keep powerlifting, bodybuilding? Yeah. But, you know, it was, I think working for one, getting a coach. My first coach was Matt Jansen. That was an excellent, you know, experience, and having someone guide me. I wish I did that earlier on. That would have been.
Would you have listened though?
Earlier on, I would have listened. Actually, I just didn't have the financial means to hire, or even know where to go. Like back then, it's like, who your coach? Well, there's some local guys around, or you know, we didn't have the social media then like we do now. So now you kind of know who all the coaches are. Yeah, and so. I would have listened. It's probably more of a problem for me to listen now. Yeah, now I know too much to listen to someone else, but. So yeah, that taught me a lot and showed me a lot of things about even execution of lifts and changing the program around to look like bring in some extra volume and hey, you need to dial back in these certain areas when you're going into prep to where you can't just keep training like an animal all the way through, right? But it was kind of finding a little bit more of the middle ground.
With the listening now, you have a different filter, right? So you can listen to advice and pick from it and kind of know what's bullshit and what's not. Yeah. Right? Because people can stumble their way to the top, but usually there's something, if you dig in there enough and ask the right questions, you can figure out kind of why they got there. Right. And with more education, it's easier for you to like filter down into that. And it's usually not the reason they think that they got there for. You know, it's usually some other low hanging fruit. Sometimes that's where you can pick up something, you know, that may work for somebody else. When did you sign with Animal? Was that as a powerlifter?
No, that was in 2016. So it was right after I turned pro. They reached out and said, hey, interested. You look like you fit well with the brand, and signed on with them, which was phenomenal because coming from the powerlifter background, of course you saw Animal and and all the black and white ads, the motivational quotes, just blue collar, like, and I started where I started training was my dad's two-story cabinet shop, right? So it's all just woodworking. I had a drop light, had an extension cord that ran up to my little stereo. So I was very alone in a dark room. And so you seeing those ads, it's like, I connect so well to this. So signing with Animal was just such a great alignment for my personality of being kind of the introvert, but also just loving to just train all out. Got on board with them.
Well, it's a good product too. I mean, I've used their ISO way for like decades. Yeah, you know, in the packs, which I always try to choke them down in one gulp, right?
Right.
You know,
it was the hardcore product. You see, like, I don't know.
Yeah, it is. I mean, Well, before that, I was talking with Bugs about this. You remember the beef liver tabs?
Yeah.
Oh,
The
horse pills.
Yeah, I always had this thing like, how many can I gulp at one time? Because you're taking like 20 per meal or something. I got up to like 15. Like, so I'd scale it up, right? And it's like
Periodize it.
So the animal packs were not that big of a deal. It's just like there's some little ones, a couple big ones. I can kill this, done, right?
They've advanced a lot now.
Yeah.
Now they're like 25% less pills. And
Yeah,
like
it's way easier.
The formulations.
Or there's just powder.
Yeah, or powder forms that taste good.
Yeah.
They don't taste like ass, right?
Well, that's the thing with the ISO way, right? It doesn't taste like ass.
Now they have a clear.
Yeah.
Now it's like fruity flavors. It's like
really
clear as the
good.
water. You're like, man, it's this stuff was out when I first started. You know?
Yeah. Now with going back into the training side, because we can go deep into that. He's probably got a whole page of stuff there. As that evolved, as the nutrition and everything else, you get to a certain point where you think that you know it all. Or let me rephrase. You get to a point where you know how to execute it, right? And then execute it. Then you got to figure out how to pivot, as you're moving through that. So with the training, how does that differ as you move into the show?
Yeah. I know some people say like, hey, what built the mass is what keeps the mass on, right? So they continue this, what they did into their prep. I think that's okay to an extent. I think for one, how you execute your exercises should always be standardized, and that shouldn't really change. I think the background that I came from was like with the logbook and DC training and making sure you beat the book. It was the wrong intent that I had. And I don't think that's what even Dante was trying to teach in it. Because now the shift in mindset was like, well, the logbook is now more your diagnostic tool, not this thing to beat on the scoreboard every day. So my diagnostic tool around gym performance will align if I have enough recoverability at the current moment, and there was adaptations to now express in my current training session, or if I need to dial back that training. So now I'm looking as more of this tool, and I'm standardizing my execution and my effort. So now when I get to repeat this day, if I don't have that performance, that recovery and fatigue might be in diminishing points to where I need to make the adjustment, versus before would be like, I just need to lift harder to make sure I uphold this performance, and that will keep the muscle on. But really, it's only continuing the fatigue buildup and probably making my prep even harder. Yeah. So the biggest shift that I'd say that I made like across prep is getting better at fatigue management. And that just wasn't even connected back then. And finding ways to create the same deficit with less fatigue and less perception of effort. But the training side, that was realizing now when I should be pulling back on at least initial parts of prep, things that are very fatiguing that don't have a lot of stimulus that come about, like so rest pause sets, these drop sets. I would initially shift to just doing straight sets and longer rest times. So make the best stimulus I can on a per set basis. So keep that quality really high. Then as I move through prep, just adjusting volume based on that recovery capacity as I get close to the show. And
so in a way, the training becomes a diagnostic tool to gauge your recovery, your nutrition, and everything else.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas before it's kind of like opposite.
Right. They're just disconnected.
Yeah.
And there's even disconnect with like just sleep and the priority around that. Like everything's very compartmentalized versus being all intertwined. So it's more of a realization around that. Even like when we first got together and I was prepping for some of these shows, my preps were brutal. Like I would be doing 2 hours in the Stairmaster, like level 10, and leg fatigue all day. You go home on the couch, you just sit there to your next cardio session or training session. You're like, why am I doing 1,500 calories and this much cardio? It's like, well, it's just been this accumulation of like a realization that was a huge point for me. It was like, you should start tracking your steps. People started talking about non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and your daily activity. It's like, well, I don't even track any of this. And I started tracking and realized that I only have like 3,000 steps a day. It's like, whoa, if I start just walking, it's like an easy means to expend energy, and I'm doing less cardio and eating more food now. And in turn, better training performance, better muscle retention because of that, and less fatigue from all this lowered Stairmaster amount. So there's just disconnects, things that picking up through that. So now like you're upholding training performance and you have your better muscle retention throughout your prep.
I think tracking the activity is huge in prep because I think people really don't realize on a subconscious level, once that deficit starts getting big and that fatigue starts, how much less you move. Like, you know what I mean? Your metabolic rate comes down, your body temperature drops a little, but you'll just inherently move less. You'll fidget
your body
less.
just wants to conserve what energy it has.
So if you didn't tell them anything and then you look at their average step count like 16 weeks out and you look at it 4 weeks out, I bet the difference is enormous, but they don't. They don't. Whereas if you now all of a sudden you're like, you need to track this and keep that stable, all of a sudden that's an extra 150 calories a day or whatever they're burning that they don't even know about, that they can bring back in food and whatever. But just to go back to the point you made about training there with like the rest pauses and the drop sets, making your training more efficient is probably a good way of summing up what you were trying to say there. Would you say that's agreeable?
Yeah, I could agree around that.
Yeah, because I think, and if we just downscale this to like say Gen Pop, not ultra competitive, just people who want to look a bit better naked or whatever, usually the first thing they'll do when they go into a fat loss phase is they'll worry about like, well, I'm in deficit, I'm going to lose muscle, I better start in drop sets, or it's better started in adding in that extra set or two to make sure I keep that muscle. And then they get fatigued and they're like, oh shit, I look like crap, I feel like crap, I must be losing muscle, I must need the extra drop set. Maybe one drop set. Do you know what I mean? People are almost wired the other way, whereas I'm glad you're going at it there from the other point. You're saying, no, when you've got your resources are doing this, so your training just has to become more efficient, and then you're tracking your performance to see like, well, if anything, my performance goes down, I probably need to do less, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, the simple analogy is like your recovery is what's in your bank account. You only have so much to spend. And once you're out, well, I guess you could take out your credit card debt, but at some point
you pay it back with interest, right?
You will pay it back. You pay it back hard, right? What does that lead to? Could be stall outs or injuries or things like that. So it's just trying to manage the highest quality training that you can with accumulating least amount of fatigue. But prep is just this inevitable snowball of fatigue that's just coming for you no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely.
So at some point, you're going to have to sacrifice some training performance. It very well could happen. It's just how are you going to manage that? I think the emotional side, there's a lot of maturity that has to come through. I think that's when it's prepping yourself, especially coming from a powerlifting background where the numbers matter. You're tied to lifts that you try to probably uphold them for longer rather than pivot and shift those lifts to ones that have better, maybe external bracing, like moving from the back squat to the hack squat. So you still get good stimulus, but it's not so like fatiguing, making those type of shifts. Or if you, especially you'll see like that lift drops off the back squat, but your isolations hold. So it's like, okay, this isn't me just as a whole getting weaker, just my bracing is not translating into the force output as much. So it's making like, those adjustments. So I just got a lot better at that and managing it on a training day to training day aspect with having a coach online, you're just limited. You don't have that guy following you around all day long. So I think a lot of things get lost in the training performance side from bodybuilding that you could take notes from the powerlifters from and let that still be a huge tool that you're utilizing to let that guide your process as a bodybuilder, even drug wise with what we're doing with PEDs and prep. What I was introduced to is like you use the most PEDs ever in prep, but why? And these are the questions that I was bringing. Why? I want to know why. Why do we do this? How do you? And when I was coaching people and trying to learn it, like, how do I justify using this or bringing this in? And well, what do they do? Okay, muscle retention. This is what steroids do. All right. Well, what's the best proxy that we're losing muscle in prep? Gym performance decline. That'd be a pretty good one. So now we should be going off probably gym performance of programming. What's your need of PEDs to uphold that? Not based on, I don't know, throw the kitchen sink at it, bro. Yeah. So like now our logbook is our diagnostic tool around recoverability, our nutrition, our training, but also like guiding PEDs. And what gave a lot of good insight, I was prepping for the New York Pro in 2018. And this is with Matt. And we started the prep cycle. Everything goes up, that gets thrown in. strength skyrockets, right? Everything's skin full. My weight stays up. You're like, well, hey, John, you got to get down to 212. You're thinking like, well, why don't we use half of what we're using? Because now at this point, you're just going to maintain muscle. And this is when we realize like, okay, you can use a whole lot less to maintain muscle in a contest prep. But I think where people get real argumentative around it is that if you don't manage the prep variables well, you're going to see that training performance really drop off because you sleep like shit. You overstress and overwork, you overtrain. So now what? You need more drug to make up for all your management of your other variables.
Yeah.
So that leads to that. And then also labeling compounds inappropriately for what they do. Like every compound is a magic unicorn.
Yeah.
This makes
a fat
you
loss drug. That's a get massive drug.
Exactly. So then you lead to having all of them in. You're like, I don't really have a good rationale behind it. But back to the point here that PEDs, like it still comes down to like managing training performance and moving that up and down. And that will drive the need for that component.
Yeah. I'm really glad you mentioned like exercise variations there though, because like when you diet down, you will lose passive stability, trunk stability. Unless you were undertrained before it strength wise, and now you're making up whatever. So like, but if you're swapping over, you're going from your back squat to your hack squat because it's less neurologically demanding. It's easier to recover from. If you're getting stronger on those, but your back squat's going down, you're probably even maybe putting on muscle. It's just your leverages over here are changing, so you can't put the force into the bar as well. But then when you put yourself in those stable environments where the muscle output is the only variable, you're getting stronger or you're staying the same. You got nothing to worry about, right? But again, people will worry about that bit over there going down and think that's a surefire sign that everything's going to hell. But it's like, well, look at the other 90% on the machines, the cables. How are you performing on those? Oh, well, they're up 5% in the last 4 weeks. It's like, what more evidence do you want? You know,
it's a hard one to gauge because with at least with powerlifting, you do need the numbers to go up to a degree, right? But with bodybuilding, like the external load you're lifting doesn't necessarily mean it's more tension at the fiber level, right? You could be altering your form to where maybe you do lift more load, but you don't expose your muscle to more tension that would cause that stimulus, right? So it's and that's very hard one to gauge. Like it's unless you're like meticulously filming your sits and watching your bar velocities and things, which no one's doing. In that regard, I do like clients to like video their lifts and send in at least 4 compound lifts that I can watch across a prep. So where we see at the end of a training block that we see vast shifts in those forms, off season or prep.
Yeah.
So I think bodybuilders could also take some advice from the powerlifters, like even recording sets and watching how you could improve form, but also if it's slipping away, just to try to drive up numbers. I think you could realize that your numbers actually move a lot slower than you think they should be.
Because then it all comes down to what's the purpose of the exercise, right? Like, sure, your back squat's gone up 20 pounds, but if it's half a good morning now and you're using it to grow your quads, is it really a better stimulus? Well, no.
Yeah.
It might get you bigger erectors and bigger glutes, though. It depends what you really want at this point, But yeah, I think because how you perform a lift, even tiny little tweaks like that can just change the muscle recruitment so much. And if you're not focusing on that, then the quality of your work drops. And then the whole basis of your workout is based on not a lot, really.
So how would you manipulate the training volume? So we'll give an instance of, say you're going to pull the back squat out, right? So because it creates more systemic fatigue, then it's going to be replaced with the hack squat, which is less systemic fatigue. Or I'll use a better example. Say it's a bench press, right? That's going to get pulled out and it's going to go to dumbbell press. So there's a difference in the systemic fatigue. Or say it gets replaced with a standing cable press, right? So you can create the muscle tension that you're looking for, the pump that you want, all this stuff with that, but it's less demanding.
Right.
So is there going to be more sets, more movements to be able to compensate for that gap? Or is that gap just being mitigated because the caloric intake and everything going into the show is going down? You understand what I'm asking?
Oh, no, I do.
Yeah.
And I've shifted some thought around this too, and I almost like to start moving to these other movements before we even get into prep. For one, that there's a degree of novelty, right? Even when you switch an exercise, you could be a little bit reserved in it. And so you might have that a little bit of catch up you need to do just to learn that not learn if you're advanced,
Be reacclimated.
but you do.
Yeah.
And there is a reservation to where you maybe don't get as much stimulus. So I would rather bring this in when we have the caloric surplus to have a degree of adaptation, you to catch up before we dive into like full on prep.
Mm-hmm.
So some of those movements that I know someone could sustain, almost rather switch to them before we even dive into prep, because I've done it, and a lot of guys can uphold those to very, very far into a
Mm-hmm.
prep. Usually it's just set reductions along the way to where maybe you have that hip hinge that's just down to like 1 set now, and maybe it's the last 2-3 weeks where you actually need to pull it at, and what that would look like.
Mm-hmm.
It could be going to like, some people do better with like a dumbbell or Smith machine RDL, and I wouldn't make up the volume anyway. If someone that's really smashed, or I could see like forms getting a little precarious, right? Maybe that is just keeping them on like a glute bridge and a hamstring curl. So we make it up with 2 lifts to where we get stimulus across those muscle groups, but remove that systemic load that would be occurring and fatigue from it.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a little dependent, but for the most part, I wouldn't be making up volume if the movement was similar enough. But if I do have to break it apart enough, then yeah, we would have probably 2 exercises and an equal amount of sets across it. So that hip hinge, which got down to like 1 set, well, hey, we do a set of leg curls somewhere in the program and some extra glute work there to make it up. Do we need the erector work making up? Now, usually I wouldn't have it in, especially if we're that close to a show.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes, people are surprised how little it could take to maintain tissue going into a show.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to today's podcast. Are you struggling to hit your peak on show day? Feeling lost in the off season? Upgrade your coaching game with J3 University. Our program covers everything from off season to contest prep to peak week, all based from real client results. Along with our comprehensive physique curriculum, you'll also get access to our 4 rooms with our J3U team to answer any questions you have, and live Q&A sessions to further your coaching and athlete experience. We are the source of education for top IFBB pros and coaches. Join us to elevate the coaching standard at J3 University. Let's get back to today's podcast.
All right, guys, if you're anything like me, there's going to be certain times of the year where you're going to suffer from brain fog because either you're working too much or not working enough, or your training just sucks and it's not going the way that you want it to go. Merrick Health can help with this. Merrick Health is a premium telehealth platform that focuses on hormone optimization and preventative medicine. merrickhealth.com/table talk. You look for the guided optimization, you set that up, you'll get 10% off your first order, even if it is just the labs or the guided optimization, by using the code Table Talk. All right, guys, if you're looking for an intra-workout, Field Rations by First Detachment would be my first choice. Each serving is packed with a precise amount of carbohydrates, amino acids, and a sodium complex for optimal performance, and it doesn't taste like crap. So if you're looking to increase the intensity of your training and to recover better from your training sessions, First Detachment Field Rations. Get Field Rations today at firstdetachment.com. Code Table Talk, 10% off your first order. All right, guys, this is how I use my element packs. I got a few different ways that I use it. So currently just got done training. So post training, I will mix one of the chocolate. This is the chocolate caramel, and my oatmeal. I'm more of a half packet guy. So put about a half a packet in there and then stir it around. Then it adds that salty chocolate taste to it. If for some reason I'm using chocolate protein in my oatmeal, then I won't put that in there. I'll put a half pack in my coffee, which I'm not going to do now, but the chocolate mocha is really good in the coffee. And then for training, when I trained earlier today, it's simply, my favorite is the grapefruit salt. Pretty much just a half pack in there, and then kind of reseal the packs and then put them in. And then, so for training, I'll have a half a pack and then half a pack in the oatmeal. So it's about a pack a day. If I'm sweating really bad, during training, then I might use a full pack in there. But the go-to for me is the oatmeal because it's an everyday thing.
So
with say the volume of the training, a contrast here, let's say you have DC training, and then you'll have what John used to do, his high volume periods. And the cardio like would be mandatory. When I'd say Shelby, when I was working with him, it was like DC training, right? So it's not really a whole lot of training time. The stimulus is high, but then the cardio's through the freaking roof, right? Where John's like 2 hours a back, right? Then no cardio, right? So do you see that type of correlation there with the training volume with the cardio? Now, granted, the cardio is still being manipulated on how you're losing to begin with, right? But for you, have you found that there's a threshold you want to stay between? Because like 2 hours of cardio is fucking ridiculous, right? I hated doing it, right? So I'd rather have just trained more. You get what I'm saying?
Right.
So where do you sit with that management of that training volume with that cardio?
I do segment them most because like, what's our main goal for weight training, right? It's muscle retention. So I'm not trying to use that as a means to just expend calories, because then we could lead to just frivolous volume that drives a lot of fatigue. Yeah. And getting to a point of diminishing returns there. And what's probably the greatest driver of fatigue in your day? It's probably going to be training. So to manage that to a degree, but enough stimulus to hold tissue. So I don't base it around trying to have a caloric expenditure, but I'm always keeping volume just within whatever that person's recovery capacity is. So I am more of this higher effort trainer that I like pretty close proximity to failure. Now, I see failure as a tool, so it's not a training program. So I'm not like, we train all the failure all the time, bro. It's like, well, no one does that.
No. Enjoy your RDLs when you do that.
Yeah. So it's like, and I think it's a learned skill too. As you get progressive and you hold that form standardized, you're able to take it farther in those reps and not compromise and remove tension off where you want it. Yeah. Well,
just the word failure in itself becomes something that needs to be defined.
Yes.
Right. Because a slower tempo can lead to failure quicker, where you can use a slower tempo. And then this is how I kind of explained to some of the powerlifters when I'm trying to teach them how to train their accessories like a bodybuilder. Like, you're using the slower tempo, you're controlling the weight, full range of motion. And, let's say it says 12 reps, but it's 6. If you stayed with that same thing, you would probably fail at 8, but you don't. Right. So you start heaving shit, cheating, but then you get to the 12, but yet you could have done 15 if you kept going that way. Right. So when people talk about training to failure, it's kind of like, well, what do you mean?
You have to define the first rep to even give context to the rest of the reps, to then give context to the failure. So that's a mess of a conversation in itself.
So how do you have that conversation?
Right. Well, it's a learning experience over time to where you take someone, right? I think, at least teaching, I know we're getting way off your initial question here, but at least teaching, I think, in your isolation exercises with someone that's a beginner, because you can control a lot of those extra variables of people shifting mechanics around. Like, if you're doing a leg extension, like you have one joint moving, like we could have a degree of standardization and take them there. Now they could shorten the range of motion, right? Or move it a little faster. But I think there's some teaching points along the way. But as you get more advanced, you're able to take it there farther and keep everything locked in to a greater degree. So I think you're on a per set basis, you get more stimulus, but also you have to realize that there's a fatigue cost to it. And that's where you have to manage it on prep, to where I don't think we can have sessions where that are that calorically robust, because the fatigue side is so hard to manage. And that's when you start moving less throughout the day, like we talked about. And then it requires now the 2-hour cardio sessions. So my means in like a contest prep is uphold that training performance and do everything to expend calories with the least fatigue cost as possible. So I have a baseline of cardio that I like from a health standpoint in bodybuilding, because of everything we do, like being 250 plus and taking PDs. This is not a great idea. We should have some degree of cardio for health.
So what is that?
I think it's going to be different for everyone based on their activity, of course, right? I have some guys that do like 20,000 steps a day, probably don't need extra cardio on top of it. So a baseline, we're just talking about this, right? Like 5 days of 30 minutes of a moderate intensity cardio, getting heart rate up 60 to 70% of your max. that isn't preferential for me. Like I'm a little different. What I've found that I like, I do 4 HIIT sessions post training for like 5 sets of 1 minute, like 80-90% of effort with 1 minute rest intervals. So I like doing like the low volume HIIT option.
Did you have to build up to that though, to build the base to be able to do that HIIT effectively, or was that something that you were just kind of fit enough to do from the start?
Yeah, I was fit enough to do it.
Okay, because I'm saying a lot of bodybuilders, or people who are maybe doing their first prep, haven't done any cardio forever, and they're like, well, HIIT's way quicker, and they're doing HIIT, but what they're doing is really not HIIT because they're not even fit enough to do real HIIT. If you get what I'm saying. No,
I do, and I had a basal of cardio there, and then also I think there's a training specificity side to it to bodybuilding, right? Like, how long does a bodybuilding set usually last for?
60 to 80 seconds, whatever it might be.
30 seconds to maybe 60 seconds. So that pattern reflects really well in upholding my work capacity in bodybuilding training. Also, it's very short duration, so the adherence is pretty good to it. And I like to be challenged kind of crazy mentally with cardio versus like this steady state that I just find boring. So there is a little bit of fatigue side to it. I mean, how I do, I think it's relatively lower fatiguing. Again, we're getting kind of off here, but I like
because this plays into the strength athletes too, right?
It does.
They won't do any cardio fitness, then they're not recovering because they don't have circulation to be able to recover.
Because eventually, like in off season, like, well, if I'm doing all this cardio for leg training, it's going to impact my leg training. So how do I manage that? Yeah, and at least with how I did HIIT is, well, for one, I'm already pretty warmed up. After a training session, I jump on the spin bike, light pedal for a minute, and I hit my first set for a minute. Then I go over to the battle ropes and I hit a set there, go back to the spin bike, back to the battle ropes, and then finish on one set of the spin bike.
So there's no high level local fatigue.
Right, exactly. I do 3 sets for a minute on a spin bike. That's all concentric pedaling, no eccentric. Doesn't impact my leg training. Then I spread out that localized fatigue to a little bit of upper body work too. You leave the gym with a big delta and quad pump. Everyone wins. Work capacity improved.
Well, there's no eccentric with the ropes either.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's where we're down now. Could you continue that throughout the prep?
That was going to be my question now. Yeah.
You're probably going to need to transition that out to either some steady state to replace that, or for what works well for me is increasing just step count. And that's been the biggest tool. Like this last prep, eventually, like 8 weeks out, no cardio left in place. I was just doing 15,000 steps a day. Again, it's a means to expend calories, very low fatigue cost. Like I'm just walking on a flat surface is pretty low energy. There's not enough stimulus there to create that concurrent, training where it impedes your hypertrophy stimulus. However, if you go walk for like 2 hours straight outside, there's a bit that could be a challenge there. So spreading that out throughout the day, that's been a huge tool to manage fatigue, uphold training performance, and not have to end up being on the 2 hours of cardio per day. So, but for some people, that's not going to be the case. They might not have the time to do 15,000 steps a day, and they might have a little bit of cardio that needs to take place. So it's just finding what's the lesser evil for that type of person to uphold the training performance, have enough calorie expenditure, and manage the fatigue and let them see out to getting stage lean. It all sucks at some point though.
You mentioned about the HIIT there not affecting your training, your leg training, whatever, because you recover from it, right? Most people look at that and go, well, I couldn't do that, whatever. But I think they almost look at it the wrong way there. And you built up that HIIT over time. You didn't, however hard you're able to push that HIIT now, you probably didn't push it that hard on day one, I presume. And then 2, should you not want to be able to do that? Rather than looking at it, I cannot do that because I won't recover. Do you not want to look at that? Oh, it'd be good if I could do that and recover, because it would probably have all these nice benefits that you've talked about, And I think that's where people have it backwards, is like, you should look at it as in you want to have the work capacity to do that. How do I get there? Rather than just going, well, I can't do that because my legs will be fucked for 3 days or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think if you looked in like the literature, how they're defining some of like HIIT, or I think if you say it's SIT, if you wanted to call it this way. So it's like sprint interval training at like above 100% VO2, right? So you'd have to, eventually you'd fail during it and you'd have to almost catch up. That's not what I do.
Yeah.
So literature wise, it's defined as like low volume HIIT. So it's less than 15 minutes in duration, 80 to 90% of heart rate max. So this is not an all out, everything I got sprint. That's a little different. But in these papers and research, if low volume HIIT compared to like a moderate intensity, you can see all the same like cardio metabolic improvements you would doing the longer moderate cardio and more frequency throughout the day. So as little as like 3 sessions a week of doing this low volume HIIT can bring about all those positive metabolic changes, improvements in insulin sensitivity, improvements in cardiac function. Everything you want as a bodybuilder to stay healthy, like in your lab metrics, is there. What ends off season? Guys getting too fat, too low in insulin sensitivity, and also poor work capacity. So if you can't train efficiently because you're gassed out after your squat, you're not going to grow as much anymore. Or if you're like too insulin resistant, now, food's getting more partitioned towards fat. Well, that ends in off season. So this is a means to actually make you keep being productive to grow for longer periods of time. So don't look at it as it's going to be this detriment. It's a thing that should be there, and also keeping that flexibility to be able to move through different energy sources, right? Like if you're a starter prep and things don't move, like you lower calories, you start some cardio up, you're like, just takes a few weeks before everything starts clicking, you feel like you're now burning body fat. It's like, well, why is that? So a lot of times you just haven't had cardio in place for so long to be able to be flexible between these fuel sources, and keeping something like that in and challenge yourself in different like low intensity cardios, something really high effort close to max heart rate, and having your resistance training gives you all these energy systems that you're able to still have the adaptations to. So when you start prep, things kick up right away. I think it's a huge benefit as a bodybuilder. To also just time management, because most people don't get stage lean. The number one reason is time. They overestimate, how much fat they have.
For sure.
So it helps with that time component where you don't have a lag in prep.
I would say outside of that as well, if all those benefits didn't exist, those wonderful effects of HIIT, how much better do you feel 6 months into your off season when your body weight is creeping up to maybe new heights compared to if you weren't doing that HIIT and that cardio work?
Yeah, I mean, even now, like I am not the heaviest I've ever been, but I'm pretty damn close to it. I'm like 7 pounds away from my heaviest, but I have great work capacity. Like I can hit my set of like my squats. 2 minutes later, I'm ready to go again. So I feel good. I don't get winded walking up the stairs,
So how would you manage that HIIT if somebody's on a beta blocker to mitigate, the side effects of the PEDs or whatever else they're taking? Because now the heart rate, is going to be suppressed.
Yeah. So I don't actually go off heart rate when I'm like gauging this effort level. So I just, cause that's a hard one to do. Like when do you hit the heart rate target? You're like, is that after? Is it during? Like I'm also going all out. So I just go off like an RPE. So call it 1 out of 10, 10 being everything I got. I'm looking for like an 8 out of 10 of effort for it. So just work hard is the main thing. And then afterwards, usually I'll see off my like Apple Watch, like, okay, I hit around that 80-90% heart rate at some point during that. And that's how I gauge it. I don't try to get overly analytical with programming heart rate during to make sure I hit the exact moment. So that's what I would gauge if you're using something like that. Yeah.
Well, it's a lot of powerlifters / bodybuilders are, right? Because that's how they're keeping the blood pressure from going sky high so they can take more shit, So I guess the other question there is, should that even be necessary in the first place? Because it's probably indicative of too much shit to begin with.
Yeah. So that comes down right to the needs versus risk of the individual, right? So when you first start out in this, like your risk should be relatively low, and you haven't seen out what even the potential might be to justify taking on more risk. But at some point we go there, and we accept the higher risk because the goal is higher, and also that's within the need of what you need to build. So should you be on a blood pressure medication? Some guys are going to need to beat it because that's within their goal and risk profile.
Well, it's better than not.
Of course. Yeah. Now, is it too much shit? Well, hell yeah, it probably is already too much shit. But it is what it is. Like it has to be, because that's part of the goal. And let's be honest, we're not in this to be the safest, healthiest guys. Like, no, we're just trying to be huge, super lean, ridiculous on stage. But absolutely, like we should have things in place, whether it's blood pressure management or lipid management or blood glucose management. Like all those things are now getting talked about now when they weren't before.
Exactly. And I think it's important that they're talked about, and Merrick definitely helps with things like that as well. But it's become part of the conversation. But I wonder sometimes, as this conversation has increased over the years, and you've seen how this has gone to where it was avoiding I don't want to say people were lying, you just avoided the conversation. Right. That's typical of how it was. And the industry had issues with that. So then now the conversation's out there. So now we got kids in high school on trend, right? And mitigating side effects and all this other stuff because the conversation's out there. So there's pros and cons, to the whole thing, right. Where, what you said is as you move up, that risk benefit ratio obviously is going to tilt, a little bit more in one direction, where we all see it tilting in that direction on year 2, right? They won't be there in year 10, not because they'll be dead, but their adaptations aren't going to be able to be the same because they're just burning the shit out of everything right from the jump.
Yeah, you just need time to build up all the other skill sets that it takes. It takes a long time to be really good at what we do. Still this day, I go in the gym, I try to figure out how can I get better at doing these exercises and executing them. And I still find ways to learn more, right? Forever student in this.
So when you're doing that, how are you gauging, are you messing with range of motion, different movement patterns, tension, like what's going through your brain as you're trying to figure out, can you do this better? Because weight's one thing, right? And that's where everybody wants to go, right? So that's an easy conversation. But what are the other metrics that you're using to figure out?
Yeah. Well, as you get older, you keep doing this. You're like, what doesn't hurt?
Yeah. Well, yeah. By default, right? Yeah.
Well, it's like, okay, that doesn't hurt. Maybe that will be sustainable. So it's a lot of times it's finding what's going to be sustainable exercises to do. I've had rotations where like, I love hip hinges. They don't love me and they're not sustainable. So I don't do those, but no, absolutely. So
what do you mean by sustainable?
Right.
So weeks, it's granted if something hurts from day one, it hurts, right? But there's some things that you can do. It hurts a little bit. Right. But you think, well, 4 weeks, there's no way I can keep progressing on this in 4 weeks and do that. So what do you mean by sustainable?
Honestly, it should be nearly sustainable throughout your whole year. So if you have a pattern that eventually leads to you getting beat up, what's wrong with the pattern? There has to be some movement that we could correct or cueing or something around it to where we could work that pattern to improve it, or it should be something different. So usually by like training block for training block, this could be an 8 to 10 week block. You'll start to get niggles or things that are starting to get beat up. And that's when I start looking back through the exercise of what am I doing that I need to be changing? So it could be overhead tricep work that I can do for a little bit, but eventually leads to my elbow shot and then I can't do it at all. So should I even do that to begin with or find a way that I can change the form that's a little bit more biomechanically friendly? So going in the gym, what are the things that I'm looking at? For one, there has to be some subjective degree that we're trying to gauge on what's a quality stimulus to the muscle. And we just saw Mike Israetel on the way here. I think he's given some really good framework around what that might be. So there should be some degree of connection and tension or distortion during your training, maybe some degree of pump that's occurring while you are training that muscle group. And trying to find those things for one. Then also movements that cater well to your own mechanics. So if you don't have the ability to get in that machine and use the full range of motion and feels like your wrist kind of binds up during it, is there another exercise pattern that allows you to get the fuller range of motion and also doesn't bind up your wrist all funny? And so it's like trying to find or shift things around to where you can find the exercise that connects well to you, your mechanics, and then also gives you that subjective stimulus. Then through that, are we seeing in a movement you were able to have the progressive loading occur? So if it's to like pink dumbbell with my pinky up, it's like, well, that's going to be really hard to progress. And maybe I'm trying to execute so much finesse that it's also taking away from my ability to stabilize and output force. Probably should pick a better movement than that. So those are a lot of things that kind of go through my mind as going and trying to pick apart exercise design.
On an individual level for exercise selection, and where does the ability to feel the target muscle kind of fall into that hierarchy of importance for you? Or would that maybe be different for someone like you who's well seasoned compared to someone who's just started, for example? Like, where does that fall for you in terms of importance?
For the beginner, it would fall on the very low end of the spectrum. A beginner they're not knowledgeable. And I think the best thing you can do with the beginner is teach the skill set, put them in the right positions to where it's going to be really hard for that muscle to not contract and work during that movement. It's like if you're, in a squat, you have them where their hips are sitting back a little bit farther, a little bit less forward knee drift. Like, how are your glutes not going to work? Like, they have to work to a degree, right? Maybe like, well, I don't feel my glutes working. And so that's the issue with perception of tension, right? It's like muscles aren't in short positions. It's a little harder to feel them like in a squat, feeling your glutes contract. So just put them in the right positions and then start teaching them along the way, and teaching them that in isolation movements would be key to where they start, oh yeah, no, I feel that contract. It's like try to translate it over to compound movements. But as you get more advanced and you advance that skill set of connection, and that's where you could really leverage that and even get more out of your sets. And that's when it matters, right? Because the beginner, hey, you have a squat, like, man, a little bit of stimulus, they're going to grow everything pretty good. But for a bodybuilder, you might need to get more direct to very intentional. And so it develops that skill over time. And that's a big component when I'm going to the gym too, is now trying to, how do we further even enhance this connection? And the progression will happen over time. Sometimes I do have to pull back in the load and reps to do so. But like even areas, especially when a lot of guys come to me when they're advanced, like, hey, John, how do I bring up this body part? I've tried everything. Nothing's responding to it, right? And a lot of times it's right cueing, exercise positioning, and then trying to get some type of mind muscle connection. So is that the prerequisite to have muscle hypertrophy and strength? Absolutely not. Is it a component to keep advancing once you're starting to get to the upper echelon? Absolutely. So that should be building up over time.
So it's one of those situations that everything that you have to do from the very beginning is like the opposite of what you have to do as you get better.
Yeah, that's at least how I found it. And it goes back to like when we were talking about DC training, rest pause. It's like, I'm just big compound movements, move weight. Yeah, I'll grow. There's going to be systemic growth, but there's going to be a point where it's going to have to get a little bit more refined, especially when you're seeing body parts that aren't coming up, like my chest sucked. It's like, but I bench a lot. Why is that happening? Oh yeah, you're cueing like elbows in, like chest up, like no range of motion out of the pec. Like no wonder your chest isn't coming up. So you have to keep refining the movements over time.
What about nutritionally, the off season? Like, how do you approach that? I mean, so the show's over, right? So there's many different theories here, right? Show's over, you just eat like a pig and grow as fast as you possibly can to take care of the
rebound.
Fictitious rebound, right?
The anabolic.
The anabolic rebound of 1 week to put on 20 pounds of muscle, right? Or a slow gradual. And then how long should that bringing the caloric intake back to neutral, I guess, how long should that take? And then how do you go into a surplus?
Renee, it's 6 cookies deep, and then
and the sushi roll.
Well, outside of that, right? So outside of day one, right? Or do you manage the day one?
The longer I've done it, the day one is it's like a crucial moment, and all those weeks start to dissipate as you go through. So a lot of people within their first day could easily add on body fat. Some people do. They do. And you'll see them even a few days later and they already had impacted by that. Some people don't, and it doesn't matter. So it's very, of course it's individual. But my least goal and how I view the post-show period is that it is still like a recovery period for most. So you're coming at the end of a contest prep where you have accrued a lot of fatigue. If you're a bodybuilder, you've already used a high amount of gear. So there is an organ stress present. There's a connective tissue stress present. Also, there's going to be a lot of hormones that you aren't only taking that are going to be suppressed to degree. Sleep is kind of in the shitter. You're not the best situation to grow, right? Now, bring food up a little bit. Training's going to start moving. And what I mentioned earlier was that training performance is our best guide to drug need. So if we have nutritionally able to drive up progress and you're coming from a state of high PED use with organ stress, this could be a great time to lower gear and recover those systems and let just nutrition drive a lot of that quality training till you get to a point where you have removed a lot of that organ stress and you're in a better body fat position to now really move into your off season from there. So I titrate that up across until I get someone with all those negative prep maladaptations removed. And that's going to vary. So it could be 4 to 8 weeks for just depending on how far past their set point they had to pull down. Like a female that might have to high body fat, that's get really lean. That might take a little longer. For the male that stays lean all the time, that might not take as long at all. So I rather get someone to their start of their off season, the leanest that I can hold them with all those maladaptations removed. And then now that we have gear low, then now we push it up when things are starting to stall, and we just keep literally moving up versus the other approach. Some people, I've done it too. You throw in a good amount of gear, maybe a little less than you were on prep. Then you have all the food come in and you drive a lot of the progress, which is progress for sure. I think it's an expensive progress because you're building stress on top of stress to then leave yourself in off season where now you have to pull gear back. And you see a lot of that awesome fullness and body fat comes back on and now recover to then eventually start your off season again. Now, a lot of the gains are probably made within that initial phase. However, there's a big downtime from there. On top of that big gain phase that you made, that huge weight increase, what's that do to organ stress on top of it? Not only the gear, right?
Which is already compromised.
It's already compromised. You're jumping up water rate, your blood pressure. What's that do to kidney function? And sure, it's just a few weeks, but we're trying to bodybuild for the next 10, 15 years. It's cumulative stress. So how do we manage that over time? And don't think just what's the next 6 weeks look like? What's the next year to 10 years look like? So if I go to off season where I spread out the gains a little bit and manage those stress factors a little bit more, I like to do it that way. So that's like even this past off season that I've had, probably the most productive. And it's just been that same like titrate gear up as you need it to keep gym progress moving versus try to take all the gains at once. The issue though, Dave, is the person that can't be regimented and that gains a lot of fat right off the bat, right? Because some other people can be very controlled. So some people might make the argument, well, why don't you leave some like drug in to help facilitate that? It's like, well, we should probably be having more of a teaching moment for these clients to try to better guard that. But I don't think that also still doesn't justify using more gear in the people that can't keep their, nutrition side, intact.
Using more gear to ameliorate bad habits. It's not a great policy.
It's only worse on health, right?
But that's more common than not.
It is more common. So I think that it still makes it a recovery spot because you're not in a mentally point to where you can control yourself. So I think the more advanced you get, that'll be lessened because now you can just every day kind of looks the same. It's just prep or off season. Like my off season kind of looks like my prep. It's just, food volumes change a bit, but for the most part, it's all the same, but it keeps it productive. But those moments post show are essential to how you're going to start your off season and then how the next prep is going to be. So a lot of guys gain so much fat in the post show period that their off season is nearly a maintenance phase until their next prep. And it's like, you're not making a lot of progress. And then they do have their off season. They end up getting even fatter. It makes the next prep just brutally hard. Right.
The titration approach that you take there, I think was almost a given not that long ago. That's kind of how you did things. And then there's kind of this camp of like, well, that there's no proof that actually that does anything. And that's only good for assessing your tolerance for a compound. And once you know that, you should just jump straight up to it and but I think they're missing the point there because what you're saying is, sure, you could jump up to 800, whatever, but then how long can you do? Sure, maybe that's your 95% tolerance or whatever, but how long can you tolerate that for? Right? Maybe it's 16 weeks. Whereas with your approach, if we're titrating up, maybe we don't make as much gains right now. But if our off season lasts 36 weeks or 40 weeks, how much do I actually progress then in 40 weeks before, as opposed to getting here and being like, okay, I got to cut stuff back, take a break, do a recomp phase, whatever it might be. So I think that's a good way of framing it that maybe people aren't seeing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know some people get really caught up in like the nuance and minutia that doesn't quite matter as much. Like if we looked at over like a year of like dose the area under the curve, is just how we're spreading it out a little bit different. And like what I mean by like titrating up is just as you just need more, you move the dose up, but that could be held for weeks. And and what does that jump look like, right? So I don't mean like every week we're adding 50 milligrams.
No, I totally get that.
Yeah. And so I just to be clear on that, but that also changes like what does the season look like for someone too? So someone like say myself that the off season is going to be shorter because you're in this Olympia circuit. And also you don't need as much tissue to add on. You're going to have off-season phases where the cycle durations would be a little shorter. So could you afford this slower titration week by week? There's no rules here, right? We're using for what we're doing. So maybe it is a more aggressive increase. Maybe it's a few weeks where we increase up to a peak dose. But I think there's still some pretty good rationale for slowly building up a little bit versus week 1, here's 3 grams. Good, I needed that week 1 to grow. Even though it's going to incrementally increase up just because of accumulation of how esters work in the body. But yeah, there's not quite rules around this. No. I mean, there's
looking at the dosing strategy from what gives me the most successful off season in terms of length and how much I can progress in that whole time frame, as opposed to, well, I know I can tolerate this, I can just jump up to this right now, but where does that stop? Do you really make more progress in those 12 weeks than you do in the 20 weeks doing it that way? Perhaps, just looking at it as a more cumulative long-term project rather than just what gets me a couple of extra pounds right now.
Is a bit short-sighted, I'd say. And again, we were talking about what ends off seasons. Right? Like a lot of guys who get too fat or work capacity drops in training, right? Or sleep turns to shit and recovery is not good. Or is it health metrics, right? Like, or some guys just have the blinders on. They just don't look at it. But that cycle approach where you just drop it all in week 1 and by 10 weeks, everything's starting to like appetites shit. Like your systemic organ stress is just high. You can't eat anymore. It's like, I have to pull back because of these things. It's like, well, that gives you a way to just try to like, not only titrate up the stimulus to grow, but also manage the stress too. So don't use so much gear that you can't eat, train, and sleep. Like those are priorities to grow. But you're right. Like it could extend out the off season longer versus trying to just take it all in a few weeks. But it takes time for your maturity side to realize. And some of this. I
think the thing that sums it up best is how often do we hear like, okay, I'm on 400 of this, 400 of this. All my lifts, if it's powerlifter or whatever, everything's going up every week. My body weight's creeping up. I'm going to go up to 600. And you're kind of like, why? It's like, oh, but because then it will be even better, right? So maybe it won't. Maybe you'll go straight over your tolerance and feel like shit. Or maybe 400 to 600 only gets you 1% more. Because, it's kind of like a relationship like that, right? At the end of the day, like, there's nothing more common than the guy who's like, yeah, it's going great. So more must accelerate the progress way better. Do you know what I mean? Whereas like with your approach, you can be like, no, let's milk this and then milk the next 100 milligrams and milk the next 100 milligrams. And I just think if you want to be in it for long enough to be good, that's probably going to be a better strategy.
Well, I would agree. And a lot of it's time too, right? Like even in powerlifting, bodybuilding, it takes years to get good. So for the young guy that wants to throw it all in, they're not really giving themselves the time to improve all the training, nutrition, and recovery variables. So the next cycle you do, maybe it does go up a little bit in a dosage. That's justifiable. But also you're better at executing all your other skill sets to where you could even get more out of the same. Or you have a little bit more on top of it versus throwing a bunch in right off the bat and it just masks all your poor, shitty training and nutrition and sleep to where eventually you get wherever you start maxing out. Now you have to look back and relearn all your shitty training and nutrition and stress management. And what do you do with your gear? It's all at the max versus the other where you've just kind of moved up over time and you've maxed out all your training skill sets high, nutrition execution is, you have the perfect bodybuilding lifestyle, right? And now you still have the dosages to work up a bit from there.
Yeah. Right now you're moving into the open, right?
Yes.
So how are you going to navigate that, right? Because now you can add more weight.
Right.
So you can push harder, right?
Right. Yeah. Just push that.
So how's this change? Everything that you just said, like how's that change now? Because to go there, you're going to have to add more mass than what you've had before.
Right.
Unless you're cutting muscle as you're going down, which is probably a possibility as well.
Yeah. So this past season was like probably going to be my last 212 when I did it, and hit a show, brought food up, right? And, gear came up a little bit post show, primarily driven through things that I had to keep low for water retention reasons, right? Like a big leveraging agent was growth hormone. I'll just be transparent here, right? And so that brought a ton of fullness in for me without any condition loss. And then I continued bringing that to that first open show and led to me being like 10 pounds heavier on stage and doing my first open one, and it went well. So that was kind of my gauge of like, do I even fit in this open category or not? And the look was so much better. Like you can't go back, once you see that, like, we just want to get better. It'd be like, lifting 600 pounds to then go your next powerlifting meet and lift 500. Like, why would you do that? Like, no, you just keep getting better. So now, like, how can I really change to keep adding on size? It's like, well, I've been able to be more reserved in my gear usage because of weight class restrictions. And so now there is an increase because I have used a lot of my variables. Like I try to do everything to maximize that I can and learn more where I can. But again, there has to be a degree of an increase. And usually I started, a 20 to 30% increase in anabolic load is a pretty reasonable starting point. Where did I come up with that? Oh, well, it's just a fairly reasonable number to start with, right? If you looked at anecdotally, like moving up that amount, it could be justifiable. So that's what was done. And I do believe off season is the time to push that. And it takes more to reach new levels of muscularity versus the other approach of use it all in prep and use lower in the off season. I find that to be the opposite when you're managing all variables and controlling those well. Also, growth hormone's been at a higher level too this off season, and that with the environment that we created post show, with like this has been one of the more tightly controlled off seasons, where starting from a very lean point, I took myself to as lean as I can be with taking all those negative prep things that go away, right? And then started this growth phase. And now I was 224 at that last show. Now I'm like 254 and still very, very lean. So I've made some solid improvements that should translate to a good open look. But what does it take? Yeah, it does take pushing the envelope a little bit more, but doing all the other things as right as you can. To still maximize them.
Do you have a ballpark figure in your head then where you want your body weight to get to before you think you're ready then to cut down for your first open show?
Well, it's about to happen. So I'm about 2-3 weeks away from like pulling back, holding this weight for a little bit, bringing gear low, and then I'll do 16 weeks of prep to the Texas Pro. So I'll do my next open show there. So I think it's the progress that's been made is worth still bringing to stage versus sitting out longer. And also based on like judging feedback too, they're like, and when you look at what's going on stage now, there's like a big emphasis on like keeping waistlines tight. Like it's not a mass monster era where waists don't matter. I think the bringing in of classic physique, you have the beautiful art in bodybuilding is kind of there, even in the open classes. Like look at your top 3 open guys, like they can all pull vacuums on stage. Like what the hell? So the judge off when I did that Legion show, he's like, don't let your waist blow out trying to get big. He's like, you just need a little bit more overall development, a little bit, and then bring that to stage.
Perfect.
So that's the feedback. So does that justify like an extra year or two off? Like, no. I don't think so. It's taking maybe that 224 stage weight and maybe getting right under 230. You're at 230. People ask like, John, you can come back at 250. Like they don't realize how far stage weight goes. Like, especially when you're developed already. Like if you don't have a lot of muscle, like, you should add a lot on, but when you're already developed, like, hey, a pound of muscle on a delt or something, like it would be like exploding. So it goes a long way. And I don't think you realize what some of these open guys are on stage at. It's a lot lighter than what you think it is.
So like you say, like 6 or 7 pounds, like you take 6 or 7 pounds of like beef mince or whatever and like kind of pack that on top of your muscle bellies and be like, that's what I grew. It'd be like, oh yeah, shit, on stage that's actually like, damn, it's a different physique at the end of the day.
Yeah, it can make a big difference just going a little bit. Even our current Mr. Olympia, Derek Lunsford, his Olympia, I don't know what he was at this last one, but he was right under 230.
Wow.
not 280, not 290, you know, so it's also how's it put together and look. So we know we're not getting on stage, getting on scales. So it's just keeping that X frame factor and building that out more.
So how will you keep that waist down so it doesn't blow out?
Yeah. So it's, for one, not trying to get overly fat in the off season.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's a big part of it. Some guys do the dirty bulk, and with gear usage, we see more of like, you know, transition of visceral adipose tissue. So now you're fighting against more organ and just fat around the organs to keep that waist in. That stretches it out too. Then just like compounding with maybe excessive gear usage too perturbates that more. And so then the biggest thing that when I was doing that show from 18 to 19, I started doing daily like abdominal vacuums. That changed my waist substantially. I went from like, you know, getting on stage and my vacuum was like a flat ab and I like could barely pull my obliques in, to where now I can like suck them in hard and really cinch my waist down. So every moment on stage is thoughtful in keeping your waist tight. And you lose a lot of these shots and these transitions where, you know, people judge it off pics, but man, you can't do that. You need to see it in person. So some of these guys their waists are hanging out when they're moving through shots. The judges hate it. You know, and hate it. So that's being done every day. So I do abdominal contractions like you're doing an overhead ab and thigh, cinching down your obliques, training your TVA, letting all your air out into an abdominal vacuum, back to an abdominal contraction. So I'll do like 10 sets of those, and that'll be sustained. So keeping that training in place to where I'm not walking around all off season long, letting it hang out either, which means you have to watch your food. So you can't go eat, you know, super high fiber foods all the time if you're worried about satiety issues, or just, you know, going too high in calorie surplus to where you do have that distended belly on top of like the visceral fat gain and everything else, to where it stretches your abdominal wall out over time.
I saw on your Insta post that you do the McGill 3 every day as well. Is that as part of that routine for a benefit on show, or is that for a back health purpose?
That was a back health thing, and I'd be honest, I kind of have tapered off a bit from that. Try some of that prehab and rehab things, they like come and go, right? Like as you need them,
for sure,
come in. So that was one when I was trying to find like, how do I balance like core, you know, core overall being lower back too. So that one that has shifted, but still doing like the abdominal training.
Now, are you guys in prep together? Are you training for any shows, or?
I am not, but I have no plans on competing anymore. But I do like the whole process of prep and the whole regimen that comes with it. So like, it might sound crazy to some people, but I like prepping alongside him, even if I'm not getting on stage. So that's what my plan is this year, at least. I'm having a little mini cut right now, and then I'll do like a 12-week grow phase, and he'll be in prep, and I'll jump on prep with him. So that's my plan.
That's a support. That's a supportive partner right there.
I love being on stage. Like I thrive in it. Like everything about it. So she's opposite.
Complete opposite.
Like, you say you hate the stage? Could you say it going that far?
I don't love it.
Don't love it. Yeah, the anxiety's super high, but she loves training, like the daily process. Yeah, that's why you're good at it, though.
Yeah, I mean, I love the training. I love even the prep diet, all of it. Just the stage is just not really my thing, you know? Like, I can sit there and see him on stage, and you can tell on his face, like, he just loves it. I see my videos when I'm on stage, and I look like I want to run off. Like it's not the same.
But that's super common. It's the same with, you see a lot of powerlifters as well. Like, they compete, but actually eventually they realize they don't really actually care about competing.
The competing portion.
They're in it for the training, and they just did the competing because they thought that was the thing you had to do.
Yeah.
But it's actually just the day-to-day process part of it that they love.
Yeah, that's exactly it for me, A
lot of people get into this because they want the stage. And they want the status and all that, but then they're not sustained because they don't have the daily love of just training in your dad's workshop, right, with your drop light, because you just fucking love to train. But yeah, that's why you've been really good. That's why it's hard on me, because I'm like, you need to keep competing. You're so good at it. She's like, I don't like it. I'm like, okay.
What was the inspiration for the J3 University?
a lot of it came out. For one, it was just my own personal of how do I get better, every day, and how do things work. So if I learned how it worked and the whys behind it, I could better implement it. Eventually you keep doing that and people ask you questions and you get to teach them about it. And then you're, hey, John, can you coach me? You seem like you know some stuff. I'm like, sure. Yeah. And so eventually I had some client load and I'm like, man, I keep repeating myself. I need a place where I can just have a database where clients can go and just learn the stuff. So that started me trying to find a web designer that could host some type of platform like that. And didn't really have an idea outside of being like this database for client resources. Went through 2 different web developers, had some like failed attempts around that. Hard to find the right person to match that. Had money lost and time wasted. Yeah. So came across the right guy. His name's Mark Fox. He's essential to everything that I do. He's the one that's familiar with Jordan Peters and Trained by JP, Joe Bennett, the hypertrophy coach, Eugene with the Kabuki method. I believe that's how you say it. He's the one that's been the backbone and structure of all those. So I got with him. I reached out to Jordan. I'm like, hey, Jordan, who do you use for your website? Because you have a great platform. He's like, yeah, Mark Fox. So I got with him, had the conversation. That's when he's like, yeah, it sounds like you're trying to do like almost like this school almost like for your clients. Yeah, I guess that's it. He's like, well, I think this could be like a business model. Like, why don't we do it like a university? So actually Mark was the one that kind of helped guide that to what it was. That wasn't the intention at first. And started just, all right, let me make a bodybuilding, everything I would want to know in bodybuilding, going from nutrition to training, all these pieces. And there wasn't a lot out there. I think one of probably the best resources that I'm just talking right now comes to mind was Scott Stevenson's book on how to be your own bodybuilding coach. What a cool book. Scott I love Scott because he's a like-minded bodybuilder like me. Like we were thought out and wanted something like that, but to be able to teach, I love teaching. It was such a passion for me. So I took a year, and this was during COVID, worked out, just recorded all these lectures to put together to lead people like through the process of everything we need to know from the informational side. That would then lead to guiding them through off season, prep, peak week, post show, to where you can leave having like a good bearing on if you wanted to coach yourself or you're starting to wanting to coach others, where to go from there.
So it took a year
to build out the lectures and film it all out and program it all into that site. Cause another side was the whole like programming piece into your own different apps and everything. That, man, I had no clue that's what it was going to take. And even my past web developers had no clue about what I needed from a standpoint on a tech side to support that. So
that's going to be a never-ending project for you though now, because you're going to go back. We're 4 years later or whatever now. Maybe on year 5, you're going to watch some of those lectures back and go, I'm not sure I agree with that anymore.
I think he already does that.
Yeah. No, you learn. You're constantly evolving as a coach, right? The stuff you write in year 1 is not what you'd write in year 20. So that's going to be like, oh, well, that needs redoing, or I need to release another module on that, or whatever it's going to become. It's going to be never-ending for you.
Yeah, without Mark, I don't know if I would have ever finished, because he was like, John, we need a minimal viable product. Okay. That means you have to finish. And you won't be able to put everything in this course, so you just need to come out, and then we will refine it. And actually, this year is when I'm going back through to reshoot, because I see like this beautiful podcast room that you have. I'm sure this wasn't here.
It's not how you started.
Podcast day one. So, Renee was my videographer, editor. So I had like a raspy mic that was buzzing, or like, there's some videos where like, I would yell at the dogs and we missed it. Like, hey, no, shut up while I'm filming. So that was in there too. So audio, video quality wasn't there. Then clarity of thought gets better. Then also materials that are like, you're right. Like you were saying, I should have added this in. So now I'm going back through and like bringing up the quality, and also people have come up with questions too that you're like, I didn't really think that was going to be missed. That I need to now.
I need to interrupt because our lift is here.
Oh, it is?
Oh, okay.
Damn, okay.
Oh,
all right.
All right. Okay.
That's fine. So, where's the best place for people to get a hold of you?
So we are most active, of course, on Instagram.
Yeah.
So at John Jewett 3 is my account.
Oh, what is mine? Roxy K Flex is mine.
What is mine? Were there any topics that you wanted to talk about I didn't bring up?
I don't think so. I think the big transition and from powerlifting to bodybuilding and how that's kind of developed over time. My big thing that I did want to cover is just trying to be more mindful in the bodybuilding approach, and don't think trying to mindful or reducing your risk is making you less optimal towards your goal. And I think that's a connotation that's been labeled onto like some of what I've done, or even with J3U, of that we're the safe bodybuilding, and that doesn't lead to progress. And I'll tell you right now, like what I'm doing is not safe. I wouldn't be a bodybuilder.
Yeah.
But I'm not trying to be a stupid one either. And I think so throughout this, try to educate yourself and build autonomy for yourself, because you need to be your own advocate when there's a lot of misuse and abuse of people out there. So we are in an information age, which is great, but also comes with who do you listen to?
Yeah.
So find people that align for the goal that you want, that have put people on stage like that. So you can't just have the guy that's all textbook, but actually has like proof through results, a result that you align with, but then also has a logical thought too, and that can explain what they're doing in a humble manner. So some guys just are challenged or defensive on things. It's likely for a reason, that there's just a shallow depth there.
Yeah.
And they're not teachers at heart. And you have a good coach, they are teachers at heart, and they want to help you with that humility in their mind too. So, if you're trying to sort through the field of information that's out there, and just try to be the best that you can be, keep those in mind when you're trying to find true experts in the field, that it comes with experience in the trenches. And I would take that any day over someone that can just recite, published studies to me. So if you like the bro that has a little bit of a nerdy approach, we do have like our J3 University, right? And that's what I'd say, if you want to get closer, more intimate contact me, like j3university.com. That's where I have like forums to interact directly with me. We have live streams, and then all of our like pre-recorded coursework. And we just released this year our level 2 physique coach credential. So if they've done like our entry level courses, we want to now become a credentializing agency for physique coaches, to kind of lead the industry. So our level 2 is all case study based off our clients. That's like the next step. You need experience. You have all the information. So we take our clients. It's cool because we go check-in by check-in, meal by meal. If you're on peak week, like you're shadowing John, if he's peaking a client, and questions will be challenged to you. Like, what decision would you make, Dave, when, this person's looking flat and we need to do what? And you'd make the call, and I would give you the correct answers around these to keep developing you as a coach. So that's what we have now, our J3U PC. But like you said, it's never ending, man.
Yeah.
It'll keep growing. But no, I think we covered a lot of the topics outside of me just like ranting on about J3U.
Well, you talked about, a lot of things that from powerlifting that carried over to bodybuilding. So what things from bodybuilding do you think should carry over to powerlifting, or that you would utilize now, so you could go back and be the powerlifter again, right? What things from bodybuilding would you have implemented into that powerlifting? I
mean, the first thing that clicks right away is I was clueless on, for one, the recovery side back then. I was young. So some advanced powerlifters are already going to have that dialed in, but there's probably I think the disconnect from what you do in the gym to outside the gym is probably a bit more in powerlifting, at least from when I was doing it.
Yeah.
And so I think translating that over from the bodybuilders of that, hey, this 24/7 of what you do is going to matter for your performance in the gym. So like prioritizing sleep and even nutrition, almost like a bodybuilder, doesn't have to be quite as regimented, but you probably shouldn't be eating pizzas every day.
Yeah.
Candy bars, right? Remember that article? You eating candy bars.
The bulky thing. Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So I
shouldn't do that. Actually, you shouldn't do that.
Some of that, because then you're like, how are you going to be a good powerlifter? Well, you probably got to do it for a long period of time. How are you going to stay healthy for a long period of time? Well, it's managing all the health variable side too. So taking some of the nutrition pieces from bodybuilders, and also now we have, like you mentioned, and we have like companies like Merrick, right, that can help with health management for us. Like utilize those, because that's only going to make you better to sustain like the high level training that we're trying to put out. So I think those things would have carried over as well too. some more of the, I know we're trying to move weight point A to B, but from the bodybuilding world is where I really learned more about mechanics and thinking about all those aspects, joint angles and setups and things that I didn't know to do in powerlifting. It was just move the weight. Again, I was younger, right? So there's learning points there, but I would have put more focused on that and learning the skill of the movement. I just didn't have the instruction or the knowledge back then to even know.
No, you can kind of get away with it too.
You can.
The younger you are, you can kind of get away with it. But all right, I want to thank you guys for coming out. It's been a pleasure. Any final thoughts?
No, just thank you so much for having us. Like, again, I've been following, just a fanboy for a second. Like, you are a huge influence, like, for me as a powerlifter, but also like in our college powerlifting group too. Like, what you've done in the powerlifting industry has been huge. And you were like this initial expert that puts out education advice and someone that's been extremely influential to me. So thank you. And it's just an honor to sit across the table from you and share some type of similarity in that.
No, it's been great. Thank you guys. We're done.
What I'm most excited about is our suppressor, is our insulin management product, because everyone loves GDAs, and so people use metformin, and metformin works, and it's a great product. The problem is metformin works through cyclic AMP, which is like an anti-inflammatory process. It's anti-hypertrophy. It is.
Yeah.
Now, it's like, like if you take a deck chair off the Titanic, it weighs less, So, but like if you're on PEDs, it's probably not but it is anti-hypertrophy. So if you can avoid that, why, let's avoid that.
If you've been following the Table Talk podcast, you know that Element is a staple in most strength athlete and coaches' repertoire when working with the athletes or as they're preparing for whatever endeavor they're preparing for. I personally use it every day. My favorite flavor is the grapefruit, which I'll mix in water during my training, post-training, or basically throughout the whole day. I'll also use half a pack on my oatmeal in the morning. And if I don't put it in my oatmeal, then I'll put half a pack in my coffee. There's a variety of different chocolate flavors that come into the chocolate pack. I use it. I'm using it throughout the entire day. I'm not front loading it before my training. And I find that it completely eliminates the brain fog, which I just had, so maybe I should have had my Element. Table Talk listeners can receive a free sample pack with any order. To go to www.drinkelement.com/tabletalk. That again is www.drinkelement.com/tabletalk. Element also offers a no questions asked refund policy. So if you don't like it for any reason, give it to a salty friend and they'll give you a complete 100% money back. If you've been following the Table Talk podcast, you've heard us talk many times about the importance of lab work and biomarkers as far as tracking it for your health to avoid brain fog, low libido, just kind of feeling like crap all the time, and to optimize your performance. Today's podcast is brought to you by Merrick Health. Merrick Health is a premium telehealth platform that focuses on hormone optimization and preventative medicine. They do this through two different tracks. The first track is self-service or self-guided. Go to merrickhealth.com/tabletalk. You're going to see that there's two blood work packages that are available. The first one is the optimization package, and I'm going to read here for a second because there's a lot in this. The sex hormones are covered: prostate, thyroid, growth hormone, lipids, blood profile, metabolic health, insulin sensitivity, liver, kidney, vitamins, iron, and inflammatory markers. So it's full lab work that you typically aren't going to get through your primary care physician, and something that would be highly recommended, as you've heard through the podcast, at least once a year to be able to have that checked out. Through the panel that we have at Merrick Health/Table Talk, you can get that guided optimization package, which also comes with a 45-minute lab review call. We have a second panel
that's set up, which is a checkup panel. The checkup panel is really more for those that have already had a full panel, but then they're routinely getting the labs done throughout the year. Myself, I get the labs done every 3 or 4 months. So the checkup panel basically is just the hormones, the lipid profile, metabolic, and blood. If anything's going to be off, it's usually going to fall within those. So the checkup panel is more for seeing if you're on the right track moving forward on correcting those biomarkers. So that panel again is at merrickhealth.com/table talk. The second path Merrick has is the guided optimization. The guided optimization, the way that works is they'll assign you a health coach. And with the health coach, the way that works is you'll set up a call with them, and then you'll determine what package or what biomarkers need to be checked based upon what you're looking for from a lifestyle standpoint, what things you're trying to correct, what things you would like for your hormone optimization, but just longevity and lifestyle and preventative medicine standpoint. Your health coach then will walk you through the whole process of having the labs done, reviewing the labs with you, and then meeting with you in regards to lifestyle changes that can be made to help offset any of the biomarkers that are off. But it's really more than that. It's to help keep you accountable for the things that you don't want to be accountable for. So for instance, when I meet with my health coach, it's completely transparent, and he has no problem, telling me that my sleep sucks, or I'm not taking the supplementation as I should, and having that conversation in a way that holds me accountable for one thing. The second part of that is I have to be accountable because the next labs will come up in 3 or 4 months. And if I'm not accountable for the things that I should be doing to correct those, then I have to meet with Jiraiya again. And he probably isn't going to be so happy about that, or he'll offer different suggestions on how to go about changing those biomarkers. So the guided optimization, the way you go about that is you go to merrickhealth.com/table talk. You look for the guided optimization. You set that up. You'll get 10% off your first order, even if it is just the labs or the guided optimization, by using the code Table Talk. So again, merrickhealth.com/table talk, discount code Table Talk.